Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Paul Johnson. We are the Last Nighters. You can find us at the show notes page, lastnighters.com/149, and also on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Tonight, we're going to be doing War Machine. I said that. The Beast of War, also called Beast or The Beast. And we are having our guest who was with us for War Machine a couple of years ago, the great Kyle Anzalone of the Libertarian Institute, who I will introduce to you now. Kyle, welcome back to the show. Why don't you tell people what your show's about and where they can find it?
Hey, yeah, I'm Kyle. I co-host with Will Porter, the Conflicts of Interest show. It's on YouTube. We do a video version of the show that I think adds a lot to the episodes, displaying the articles that we talk about, stuff like that, news ticker on the show. And then I do the daily news roundup at the Libertarian Institute. And then my role there is the news editor. And I also work at antiwar.com, helping to put together the viewpoint section of that site.
Well, that's a lot of really important stuff. I remember back when we had you on for War Machine a couple of years ago, you were doing, 3 or 4 episodes a week back when your show was called Foreign Policy Focus. And I always considered you one of the hardest working people that I knew with just being able to churn out content, whereas we do a weekly show, and that feels like a bit too much. Robert and I were just talking the pre-show, which is available for Patreon supporters. Go to lastnighters.com/Patreon. This is our third recording this week. We did 4 hours of election coverage. We did an episode on James Jenneman's Urban Agorist, and now we're recording again tonight. So if I'm a little bit tired and sloppy, that might be why. But anyway, Kyle, I'm really glad that you came on for this. When we were looking to do an episode with you, of course, I wanted to be, centered in the Middle East somewhere. This is, going to be released right before what's now known as Veterans Day, but I like to consider it Armistice Day. So like a military Middle East thing, it kind of ties the time of the year and then also your expertise into a movie. And one of the ones I was considering was Rambo 3. I still think it would be a good movie to do, but I think this one was perhaps better. And it's almost the same setting. And this, we can talk about a lot of the same events and the same people. So this will be a lot of fun, I think. And speaking of your new show with the video format, we have video format here. And we can also share articles or Google descriptions, which is what we'll do now, how we start off. So this is The Beast, came out in 1988, rated R. It's a war/drama film, 1 hour, 51 minutes. It's available on Amazon Prime right now, so if you guys want to watch it, I've got a link for you on our show notes page. It got 7.3 IMDb, 85% Rotten Tomatoes, and 3 out of 5 from Radio Times. That's the first time I've ever seen a rating from Radio Times. And 89% of Google users liked it. This is the description. It says a Soviet tank unit led by Commander Daskal destroys a village in Afghanistan in 1981. Taj, a member of the village, vows revenge and pursues him along with the Mujahideen. Meanwhile, the radical Daskal turns violent against his unit when he murders the tank crewman for his Afghan ethnicity and leaves tank driver Kovachenko to be killed by the Mujahideen. Taj, however, offers Kovachenko sanctuary for his assistance against the unit. It came out September 16, 1988. The director is Kevin Reynolds, who also did Waterworld and Red Dawn. It cost a couple of $1 million to make, I believe, and they got a box office of only $161,000, which is quite a small amount. And I'm very surprised, Robert, in the pre-show, you were telling me that you'd never heard of this film, and either had I. But it was recommended by a listener. So I want to just read for you guys the recommendation. It's our listener, Nick, who said, I stumbled across a movie I'd never heard of. It completely blew me away ever since. So ever since, I've been desperately trying to convince everyone across movie fandom to give it a shot and hopefully drag it out of complete obscurity. I kid you not when I say this is the best Hollywood film you've never heard of. Quentin Tarantino's old writing partner, Roger Avery, has it down as one of the best movies of 1988 and also has it down as one of his 20 desert island films, with Apocalypse Now being the only other war film. If you do see it, let me know. And if you agree with me that this might be one of the 10 best American movies of the 80s, one way or another, we need to find a way to raise this movie's profile and prevent it from its continual obscurity once and for all. So I think it looks like a winner to me. and that's why we're doing it tonight. But anyway, Robert, let's go to you for your opening, and let me know what you think.
It made what, $100,000? Is that what you said?
$161,004.
Wow. No, that's criminally low. I wonder what was happening. What happened with the marketing campaign? Whether they just wanted to dump it on the market and without any kind of push. I don't know what else was happening or what they put it up against. Sometimes they make those kind of mistakes. Sometimes you put something on the schedule when it's going to come out, and then somebody else releases like Avatar or Star Wars or something. You're just like screwed. But yeah, whatever happened, this movie came out and got immediately forgotten for even the few people that did see it. But I think the vast majority just never heard of it in the first place because it is quite good. It tells a pretty dang good story, if a little bit. I mean, I have my little quibbles. I don't think it's a perfect film, but it is one of the better war films I have seen. I have issue with how poorly the Mujahideen, maybe I can get Kyle's help to help me pronounce the word, Mujahideen. The Mujahideens,
yeah,
they are very much
That's right.
they are very much portrayed as, I mean, I get it. You have these like basically goat herder type people. You put a machine gun in their hands, they're not exactly Rambo. But in this film, they are comically terrible at fighting. It actually ultimately the women are the ones that actually know what they're doing and disable the tank. So I thought that was cute and almost appropriate for how badly the men were doing with this. But yeah, overall, well acted for the most part. The story has a believable villain in it, in this like super ultra dedicated, pig-headed, will not be denied tank commander. In spite of all the evidence, he's like, no, I'm just going to keep going and I will not be stopped. And we're going to live and die as tank men, which is, it's a little bit unbelievable, but I liked his single-mindedness.
Yeah, he went a little Captain Ahab, I think.
Yeah. You can get obsessed with the thing. You can have enough people, face enough obstacles and overcome so many obstacles. You get to a certain point and you're like, well, I'm not quitting now. After all the stuff that we've been through, I'm not giving up on this tank. We're going to see this through to the end, through hell or high water. So that was believable and fun for the most part. Yeah, no, it's a good film. It deserves more recognition for sure. I'm sure we'll get into some of the little quibbles and whatnots that I have, but for overall, it's definitely is worthy of far more recognition than it has.
Right. Yeah. I'd agree with a lot of that. And Kyle, do you have an opening take? I know that in our private group, we were talking a little bit, and you said that you really enjoyed the opening scene, which it's well done and it really sets the tone, but it is kind of horrific, man. Just seeing how they attack that village and torture the guy, kill him in the most gruesome manner right in front of his fiance. It's pretty rough, but yeah, it certainly sets the tone. And yeah, what's your take?
Yeah, so I was actually talking to my co-host Will Porter about it and was recommending the movie to him because I enjoyed it. And well, I don't know if I enjoy is the right word, but it was a good movie, and it definitely I think the way the characters are and set up, the way the movie is set up, where like it's Russians fighting Afghans, but the Russians all have like American accents and stuff and speaking English just fine. That I don't know whatever like kind of social dynamics are then at play for the audience of the movie and everything, but it doesn't feel like you're like taking a side, and like you're sympathetic to at least one or two of the people in the tank, and certainly the Afghans and the Mujahideen and stuff like that. And so there's a lot of themes in the movie I thought were really good, and actually made me and Robert could talk about this, but I thought the general's attitude was actually a pretty good portrayal of the severe PTSD that he obviously suffered from. So I think that's like probably most of my opening thoughts, but I'll definitely recommend this movie. And if people haven't seen it, I suggest it. I think the opening scene, I saw Saving Private Ryan. Probably I was way too young for it, but I felt like kind of like that when I watched this scene, with just like kind of the opening of the movie like this, and just how you have this like peaceful Afghan village with people going about their lives, and then like out of nowhere these guys wearing crazy gas masks just come in and destroy everything in the most horrific way, poison the water, flamethrowers and torches and stuff like that. I mean, you have to watch it to really understand what I'm saying. I can't describe it well enough, and that's why you have cinema and movie to do this. But it was a very powerful scene.
Yeah, and it's just like indiscriminate destruction and killing, and obviously, we're presented with this, and we're supposed to think that these are like super evil people. Do you know if there's any validity to the history of that? Like, did that actually happen, that type of thing, or is this maybe overplayed? Because I can't see a military tactical reason for destroying this tiny little goat herder village, men, women, and children, all the animals. They're spending a. Now I get it, they're Russian Soviets, so they're not so good at the allocating resources. They sure are expending a hell of a lot of resources in destroying this very third world little village here. And it reminds me of a meme I saw, like $100 million jet dropping $1 million bomb on $1,000 shack.
Right.
It kind of seemed like what was going on here. Do you know the history of the Afghani war with the Soviets, and was this type of atrocity like a thing? Because it looks like war crimes to me.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't. It's not something like I'm much more familiar with like the U.S. war in Afghanistan than the Soviet war. Like I know the details, and I think on my shelf right above my head is War at the Top of the World. It's by Eric Margolyes, and it's definitely the recommendation I have for this war on reading. He actually spent some time in and around the Mujahideen. Aaron Margulies did, and so I mean the atrocities by the Soviets were absolutely brutal. I'm not sure if this was like representative of what happened in like thousands of villages where they went in and destroyed every single thing and poisoned the water, but they did do all of those things, right? I don't know if all those things happened in one village or if it again is representative of everything, but the Soviets committed horrible war crimes. I think they estimate 1 million Afghans died in that war. It was horrific, and they did things like retaliate against villages where the Mujahideen came from and stuff like that. And I'm sure, I don't know all the literature on this, but the Soviets were waging an occupation campaign, so I'm sure they have some of the same problems that the Americans had as well, where their translators didn't translate accurately, or their informants gave them bad information because they wanted to wipe out the guy they had a grudge against, not actually help them fight the insurgents or the Mujahideen or whoever. I mean, I don't think it was outlandish, the portrayal of what happened there. It may not have been representative of everything, but certainly those kind of war crimes were committed by the Soviets.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, but I believe it's Zbigniew Brzezinski's The Grand Chessboard that talks about how they set up this war, wanting to give the Soviets their own Vietnam. Arming the Mujahideen rebels along with Osama bin Laden and those kind of guys to fight off the Soviets. But what was the reason that dragged the Soviets into this area in the first place? Was it resources? Was it they claimed this land as their own, or was it like, hey, we need to stop Western imperialism? What was it? Or do you know?
So in War at the Top of the World, the case that Eric Margulies makes is the Soviets were trying to expand their empire all the way south, I guess, to the Indian Ocean. So if you have Afghanistan and then you have a part of Pakistan, and Pakistan, I believe you have the port of Karachi, which is either in like the Bay or the Indian Ocean. And so his thought was that the Soviets were trying to expand their empire that far. I don't know what was going on with like Soviet policy at that time. That's just not something I know a whole lot about. I mean, it could be, you know, more or less the kind of the same just thing that got the Americans there, is that, you know, once you have some reason to go in, you just get stuck forever. And so it could be that kind of situation. And also, you know, I'm sure the Soviets had their grand strategists who were telling, you know, their leaders, just like, you know, American leaders are being told, oh, you can't let the Soviets have Afghanistan. You have to, you know, arm the Mujahideen to make sure that they, you know, can't build like a pipeline from Moscow to the Indian Ocean or something like that. So that's the kind of, I'm sure, rhetoric that was going on all sides, and in part contributed to. But yeah, I'm not like a real expert on all the Soviets' reasons for the war. I assume that at least some of them are illogical because it's a communist government.
Right. Now, is Charlie Wilson's War, that movie that's based on real events, was that also centered around Afghanistan and arming the Mujahideen?
I will admit I haven't seen that movie, so I can't say for sure. Okay.
Now, from my understanding, the Mujahideen were given the, and I keep saying it wrong, and I'm sorry, but Stallone dedicated Rambo 3 to them and viewed them as freedom fighters. And they were in a position like, Robert, we were talking about in The Purge, where, you know, in an Alamo type situation where you have an invader coming into your land, the place, you know, and you know how to be, and you know how to play the strengths and weaknesses of the land, and how to trap them. And we see some examples of that in this movie, that you have an advantage related to the invading force, and that's how you can kind of get stuck in this sort of quagmire. But I also recall that the Taliban didn't seize power until after the Soviets left, right? Or because the country of Afghanistan had been destabilized, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, eventually, like with the fall of the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union had to leave Afghanistan, which then, you know, there was just all kinds of different warlords and factions and stuff like that. And I honestly think the U.S. policy was kind of like fine with the Taliban like gaining ground and everything. It wasn't until like the Osama bin Laden thing that the Taliban being in charge of Afghanistan really became an issue for the Americans. And so, I mean, I guess, yeah, it's in part because the Soviets left that, you know, you had the power vacuum, and then the Taliban end up, I guess, you know, winning the war. I'm not exactly, you know, a great history on the Afghan part of the Civil War there, where it's all Afghans fighting each other, or at least for the most part. But, you know, the American weapons were there, and I'm sure there was, you know, Soviet remnants and stuff like that left over that they used to fight each other. But I do know it was a bloody, horrific mess.
Right. And the Taliban are only bad guys because they, gave safe harbor to bin Laden, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a concept that's addressed in this movie, which is interesting. You know, is like heavily addressed and plays a role in the movie, but, you know, 13 years before 9/11, and it's the like Pashto honor code. It kind of says that, you know, you seek revenge on those who turn against you, but if somebody comes and like asks for aid, like you're required to give that to them. And so that is kind of the position that the Taliban had on Osama bin Laden. Was after he left Sudan, he came and sought refuge in Afghanistan, and they felt honor bound by their code to give him that refuge, just like, you know, in the show that the Afghans give to the tank driver eventually. So, or in the movie there, they did that. So, yeah, I mean, I thought that was like a really interesting part of the movie, and just showing like how committed the Afghans are to that code is important. Although Scott Horton documents in his book Fool's Errand how even with that code being in place, there were apparently a couple times where the Taliban tried to signal to the Americans that you could go ahead and take out Osama bin Laden, like he's not under our protection right now. But either the Americans didn't pick up on that, or there were several cases where Bill Clinton declined to take out Osama bin Laden, even though he was offered the ability to strike him.
And this was before 9/11, but after like the 94 tower bombing?
Yeah.
Or 93, whatever that was, when they did the basement thing. Okay. Yeah. You know, we were talking about bin Laden. He was celebrated back in the late 80s, I think, around the time that this movie came out, and the Mujahideen were, you know, considered freedom fighters, like in Rambo 3, like we're talking about. But I got a Facebook strike, which I think is why I can't live stream right now. And one of the strikes was a picture of a newspaper clipping celebrating bin Laden and his building of roads in Afghanistan, because he's rich and has money or his family has money from oil or something like that. And it was like this, puff piece about him. Well, I got a strike because it's a dangerous character or dangerous individual, something like that. So I've now had my account limited for posting a newspaper article from 25 years ago or 30 years ago.
Right. That has a historical importance. That's crazy.
Yeah. Like I'm a little bit torn. Like, I don't want to like have a bunch of Hitler stuff, but you want to know who the guy is and what he did, Right. So you got to be able to see that. Otherwise, how are you going to know?
Right. Well, like at the same time, they'll put out these studies and say, oh, enough American school children don't know that, 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust or something like that. And how that's like scary and terrifying. And then everywhere in the culture, you censor anything related to Nazis. And it's kind of like, well, they're not going to know about it if you're, censoring it everywhere. And if you're, just taking it, if it plays an important part of history, like allow it to play that part of history in our present culture. But if you censor it, it won't. And then people won't have the, correct historical context for it. So they want it both ways.
If people have bad ideas and bad arguments, then counter it with better arguments, not censoring. Like, I don't know if it was in the pre-show bonus content, but you were talking about they're censoring Trump, and he's trying to contest these election results, right? And so there's all these ideas out there but they're being kind of shut down and censored, and so people are shielded from it. Like the Hunter Biden laptop, so many people didn't know about it because that news story got shut down. It got censored by big tech and big media. I think the New York Post was the original outlet to try to report on it, and they got shut down for it. So it's really interesting to see where things are going. Just in general, it's like the war on information. I remember Alex Jones, you say there's a war on for your mind. Man, he was right.
Yeah, Alex has been saying that for decades, man. He's been saying that for decades, and he should get props for that. But instead, he gets memory hold, just like Hitler and bin Laden, apparently. I kind of want to go back to what we started with at the beginning of the film, and how the intro is quite brutal. It is amazingly brutal. Basically, just for the disparity in effectiveness of fighting, right? I mean, you've got this guy, this tank battalion, basically just slaughtering, not battalion, sorry, single tank crew, basically in a shooting gallery with essentially defenseless victims. I mean, technically you could say it's in a war and they're just hitting some kind of soft target. It's debatable on what exactly the target is, other than just this little goat herding village. I mean, when you go and you put cyanide in the water and you set, people on fire that pose no threat to you, it looks like the My Lai massacre, right? So as a viewer, we open with this, and it's, that the movie's going to have to do a lot of work, a lot of good character work to get the audience on board with any of the people in this tank being like deserving of anything but horrific death and retribution and violent death. So it is kind of a, they go with the infighting, and they show the resistance to this tank commander. And then of course he executes his own man in the river because he claims that he's a traitor of some kind. He has no evidence. He doesn't say it. He's just like, well, he's got a feeling, and he's going to kill us. I just know it.
And he's an Afghan, so he's expendable.
Right. And he's an Afghan, so, screw him. Whatever. That's what we're doing here. We're killing Afghans all over the place. So what's another one? But the guy's like, hey, I've lived in Moscow for like decades. My family lives there. Why would I jeopardize my family to betray you here and now. He has actually a fantastic argument. And the tank commander doesn't have zero argument. He's just like, yeah, I don't care. You're a traitor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm in a position of power. And if anybody contradicts me, I'll kill them too.
Yeah, there were a couple of like somewhat ambiguous situations that got blamed on that Afghani guy, but they were viewed in the most uncharitable light by the commander.
Right. And I think like the first situation was like the loading or one of the rounds was a dud or something like that. And then later in the movie, there's like a little part where I think it turned out to be something that the gunner was doing. He was turning brake fluid into some kind of alcohol and drinking it by fermenting it. It was a crazy process, but I guess it like actually could kind of work. I did a little Googling on that. But anyways, something in that process had actually caused the shell to misfire. So, that was something that the commander then blamed on him. And then another time, I think there's just something that happened and then, the commander blamed that guy. But, it was something that I thought what just was interesting to me is how expendable like the translators are. And that just to bring to Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange, they released the Iraq warlords, and in there was an example, at least one of some US snipers that had their translator with them. Their translator was walking up behind them and scared them, and they shot him. And that's just his, like, no repercussions or anything like that. So that kind of stuff happens.
Yeah, it's wild. And yeah, the drinking of the breaks, and I'm drinking the breaks here, but the guy was probably jonesing for alcohol, so he must have been willing to do so much, so he drank the breaks. But also the Afghani guy, he had said that he used to be a man of faith and he knew what he believed, and then he went to college and now he's not sure what to think. And I thought that was really interesting, especially for the time and era in which this was made, 1988. I mean, Robert, I remember your uncle was always telling us before we were graduating from high school, he's like, oh, you go to college, you just prove that you can go to college, or that you can, follow orders and get a piece of paper, but do you actually learn anything? So I think he was very ahead of the curve as far as like the indoctrination centers, as they so obviously are now. Like it's so blatant now, but I think back when we had gone, it felt less in your face as far as the indoctrination component of it. Now, granted, you never really know your frame of reference at the time. But I feel like looking back that college, the college things I see now seem nothing like the college we went to 20 years ago.
Yeah, somewhat. Although, the way this is handled in the film is the guy, I mean, he was he went to, he was an Afghani, and he went to college in, Moscow, right? Mm-hmm. And so he's given over to all kinds of, like, Soviet ideas. I don't know probably about the state and whatnot. But he was still very much of a religious person, and he still held on to that part of his personality or his being. I, on the other hand, it's kind of interesting. Well, I don't know if it's interesting or not, but and I know not everybody did this at all, but I went to college and I didn't necessarily switch my religious views. I just kind of had my religious views enforced and amplified because, I was essentially like this teenage atheist guy. And I found all kinds of fantastic arguments about why God doesn't exist and this kind of thing. So I left very much still, even more of an atheist, but probably more of a statist too. So I guess to your point.
Yeah, and I think it's worse now, obviously. Now, another thing that I think was pointed out a couple of times, how those situations with this Afghani translator guy and the tank commander were somewhat ambiguous and sort of could be viewed in favorable light or unfavorable light. So he could be viewed as a traitor. Similarly, when the tank is it's at night and they're not sure, that they know they're being followed, but they don't know what's around them. So they set some proximity sensors and some booby traps and whatnot. And then something triggers their sensors, and they just start firing all weapons in a 360 all the way around, scorched earth kind of thing. They're shooting out liquid gas ignited on fire, or oil, or whatever. They're firing their guns, and it turns out it was just a group of deer, a herd of deer. They all just got slaughtered. Well, when the Afghanis get there the next day and see this carnage, they view it from a different light. Like, the tank guys were like legitimately scared. They thought that they were going to be attacked, and so they overreacted and tried to defend. Meanwhile, when the Afghanis saw the carnage, they're like, look at these people. They're just killing for the sake of killing. They're just heartless monsters. Like, they're just doing this for sport. And it's just another situation where, depending on the perspective on which you're viewing it, you get a totally different story.
Yeah, and that's something this movie does quite well. Even though I think that even with the tank commander being like the cartoonish type villain, he's still a believable, understandable character, and he still feels very much human. And I can kind of believe, even though, I don't the PTSD and like the paranoia. Maybe Kyle can talk to that a little bit, with him like being a young boy in Stalingrad fighting off the Nazis, being a tank boy, being dropped down to drop bombs on tanks and Molotovs on tanks and stuff, not them being pulled back up. That's got to be a horrific experience for a little kid. But just being that kind of, I don't know, the mentality of this commander where it's your responsibility to get this tank back to wherever you need to go. You're in like absolute dictatorial control, and you suspect there is a traitor among us. I don't know. What do you do? I think obviously he's a villain. But I didn't think he was necessarily that cartoonish. I thought he was quite believable. And I thought it was well done. Like a human villain. I thought it was well done.
Like a true believer, but maybe he snapped.
Yeah, like the intense like pressure of being in the tank the whole time, like, gives him kind of an out, I think, for being like acting crazy. Like, it's obviously a high pressure situation. His life and the lives of his men are at stake, and so I thought the only part about him I thought was kind of cartoonish was like the Stalingrad story. Maybe that's accurate, and like I should have like Googled and looked. I thought that part sounded like, the old man going, I had to walk up hills both ways barefoot to school kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But later he's also going on about like, how there was a tank that was hit by an RPG and everybody else in the tank died, but he lived. And just like, obviously the guy only felt safe in a tank like that. Like, his life was in and around tanks, and like he was like a soldier, and the Soviets had been fighting for a long time, and he had been fighting for a long time. And so like, like a tank commander and a soldier is what that guy knew. And so that's what he was gonna do. And so, yeah, I think even with that, like, from his perspective, like, he eventually has to sleep in. If this guy kills him, he's going to kill his men and take his tank, and he can't let that happen. So, you do get a sense of like the guy, and also I think the challenge to his authority was something that like he couldn't tolerate. And that part, I'm sure, was like, it just felt a little bit Soviet to me, was like the pecking order, the whole thing, and everybody being so afraid to step out of the line. I mean, I imagine it's a lot like that in the U.S. military too, but I don't know. You had to imagine if all those crazy things were happening, somebody would have said something beforehand. But maybe that like kind of just the Soviets acting like robots kind of thing I had in my mind.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the differences between the armies and the propaganda. Like, so I have in my mind, maybe this is just basically because due to propaganda, I don't know, but that, you see enough war movies of American soldiers running around and being like, leave no one behind, and we're going to go in and save that one guy or that one platoon, and we're going to go and rescue those people. And we're going to, we're not going to let anybody die, that doesn't have to, and don't leave them in the hands of the enemy and whatnot. But in this movie, the Russians at the very end of the film, where they're in the tank and the tank commander's like, what is it? When it's a moving tank, it's a tank. When it stops moving a tank, it's a bunker. And then when you're out of ammo, then you're a hero or something like that, right? And then he goes to kill himself and everybody else. And that just seemed like a very, like, I can't imagine the U.S. military having that policy where they're going to go home and tell, I mean, they're going to go home and tell the families that, you know, so-and-so died, the hero. But I can't even imagine, even in boot camp, that they're like, okay, this is the policy, guys. You're going to go in and you're going to go kill yourself when you're out of ammo. What do you think that was realistic? You know, or is that like total propaganda? What are your thoughts on that, Kyle?
I mean, I buy it. Maybe I buy it because it's good propaganda. I don't know, but I mean, you know, when you don't have a lot of religion really, and you know, you kind of erase God from your society like the Soviets did, and then, you know, instill the highest you know, meaning in life is to help the, you know, Soviet Empire expand. And the tank driver, you know, or not the driver, the general or commander of the tank there certainly believed that was the case, you know, that the most important thing in life was to fight for his nation and his country and to expand the Soviet Empire and do his role in it. I mean, I don't see that being all that different from the Japanese kamikazes or something like that. So it didn't particularly surprise me. I would guess that, you know, they probably don't want to, you know, him might realize that if he gets captured that the Mujahideen could fillet him or something like that. I don't think he really thought the Soviet Empire is going to negotiate for him back or anything like that either. And so, you know, once you hit the end of the road, you don't want to like actually lose to your enemies. And you know, maybe there's a little bit of taking the Hitler way out too. And you know, and obviously in the movie, it's not like every Soviet was programmed good enough to do it. The 2 of the 3 tried to, you know, stop him. It's just the one guy that's trying to do it. So that, I mean, that's impossible to me.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and then the you know, not leaving anyone behind. Well, they killed their Afghani translator, and then they left Kovanchenko tied up to the rocks so that the dogs could eat him. So it certainly didn't seem like they had a code of honor that they were following that had that type of vein to it. I was surprised that they did leave him out there to just, I guess, die of dehydration and being eaten by the rocks or by the dogs.
The grenade.
Yeah, the grenade.
Well, the grenade if he tried to move.
If he slightly moves his head. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that was messed up. And I didn't understand that the animosity between the commander and Kovanchenko until he killed the Afghani guy, and Kovanchenko was like going to report it. Because, like, did you guys understand what the friction between them was? Like, I guess Kovanchenko had already been like busted down a rank previously for something else, maybe that they sort of alluded to, but it wasn't like made it explicitly clear. But they didn't like each other. And then when he kills the Afghani guy, then he's like, well, I'm writing this up in the reports, and, you know, you killed your own man. And then whatever else happened at the end of the canyon, or the, what do you call it, where they were trapped in the pass, or like it was a box canyon, right? So they couldn't get out. That's when he tried to tie him up, because he said he was being treasonous. And I thought it was a fairly realistic and innocent question, like, hey, what are we going to do, because we're almost out of food, we're almost out of fuel, we're almost out of ammunition, and we've got these guys following us who don't seem to need any of those things, and they're going to kill us.
Yeah, no, it seemed like a perfectly reasonable thing, but I can see from the commander's perspective the need to maintain morale even in the face of all known evidence. So to focus on those negative things might be not the healthiest thing to do at that time. But from a realistic standpoint, yeah, well, why are you killing me for just telling the truth? That's just,
yeah. What do you think that does for the morale of the other guys? Like, oh, right. This guy questioned me at all with legitimate, you know, questions, and I'm tying him up to rocks with a grenade behind his head.
Right. Now,
I
As
think
far
I thought it was to maintain order was kind of my take on it, was that he felt like he was being undermined, and that's why he did it, and that's what he couldn't handle. And also, just a note another time, the very first scene, you know, he's hesitant to drive the tank over the guy laying in front of the traps there. You know, I mean, he does it right on the order of the general, but he is hesitant, and he's friendly with the translator. I think are the two things that really raise that feed the general's paranoia, or not the general, the commander's paranoia.
Right. Yeah.
Now speaking of that though, I do have to ask you guys. I know Kovachenko is basically turns into the good guy in this film, but there is that scene where he's talking to the translator, and he's like talking about how he had a hard time driving over. You're like, why did you crush that guy? And he's like, I had no choice. I had to crush him. And the translator's like, you always have a choice. And I have to agree with the translator guy there. Yeah, I mean, but you know, you're kind of splitting hairs here, right? Because you just drove this tank into this village, and you just mowed down all these people, and you set them all on fire, and then you have the moral quandary of whether I guy or not. It seems like you're kind of splitting hairs at this point. You're already Darth Vader. I mean, are you not? I mean, is he morally justified in what he did just prior to that? I have a hard time.
I think the issue might be that one is more visceral, like it's close and it's more immediate, and it's more like almost a torture. Like the guy's going to be alive for a while while you're doing this, whereas the other one is a little bit more distant, and it's like there's other tanks involved and other people. It's sort of like a gang mentality. You're doing it together. Whereas this other thing, it's like him alone being ordered to do something, and he's making that decision to do it. And he's hearing those bones crunch and the guy screaming.
And I think the threat level there, when you have a village, there are houses, there is, I mean, there's no evidence of a threat in the film, but there is, like, you could imagine that before they got orders that the Mujahideen had come from this village, which I think they kind of, there's a couple times where the guy from the village which I thought this was a really interesting part of the movie that I liked, was there's like a guy from the village whose village gets destroyed, and then he goes and fights the tank with the Mujahideen fighter. Like, he wasn't an insurgent, he's just the leader of a village, and then they come and crush him, and he becomes one and teams up with the Mujahideen. So I thought that was like a good theme of the film, just as far as how that goes. But you know, when you have that village there, at least then you imagine that beforehand, you know, they got their orders that there were some bad people in this village, and that they had to, you know, get them because of the surprise attacks on the Soviets. And just last week, a tank got blown up by an RPG by some Mujahideen guy, and he was from this village. And so you got, but then this particular guy is just laying on the ground. Like, he is clearly not and cannot be a threat to you or anyone. He, in fact, willingly got on the ground in front of the tank track. You know what I mean? He is like, I am an ant to you. You could choose to kill me or not, but I have no ability to stop it. Right. And then taking that life is, you know, in a lot of ways, a lot worse. Like, you know, talking about, like, you know, Darth Vader there, just to maybe do a comparison, like when he goes to the, like, Jedi temple and kills all the, you know, the younglings and everything like that, you have to imagine that he was told beforehand that, you know, these people are potentially a threat to you, and they're, like, on the path to becoming evil. But then when he goes and, like, slaughters the Separatist Council, he actually then, like, gets his Sith eyes and turns into a Sith. And I think it's because those people were supposed to be his allies, and expected him to be an ally, and were completely a non-threat to him. It was just, you know, a slaughter of people who were on your side, and for no apparent reason. And so that's, like, in some ways more evil of an act to, you know, slaughter somebody who can't be a threat to you, versus somebody who, even if it's a village full of civilians, like, the unknown factor gives some potential for the need to commit violence.
Okay, so you're giving him some somewhat of a pass for his actions in the beginning, in the opening scene.
Not a pass. It's horrific and unacceptable. Like, he shouldn't have done it, right? But I think there's like I guess especially as far as like the soldiers and doing routine soldiering, like, you know, going and shooting your taint shells into a house, like that's what taints do, right? But crushing a guy to death is kind of uniquely kind of weird thing. It's like, you know, the Saudis will kill and starve 100,000 Yemeni children to death, but then they kill and dismember Jamal Khashoggi in the Turkish consulate, and it's like people are like more upset by the killing of Jamal Khashoggi in the Turkish consulate, and you kind of get it because like he's a journalist, he's in a consulate, he's completely, you know, unarmed, he's not going to harm anybody, and you come up and dismember him. Like, in reality, like killing 100,000 Yemeni children is worse, but you know, just as you tell the story and you think about it, like one is a war and one is just murder for the sake of murder.
Right. And as you're saying that, it just brings to mind the Joker in The Dark Knight, where he's talking about you just break the rule. You kill 1,000 guys and everything's fine. You kill 1,000 soldiers and everything's fine. But you kill like one old lady and everybody loses their minds because it's like against the rules, these made up rules that we have of decorum and honor. But yeah, like you're saying with the intro of that film, of this film that we're discussing, it does bring to mind the insurgent math, right? Of how do you kill enough of your enemies? Like in this movie, they kill a whole bunch of people in this village right off the get-go, and then they smash the Khan, right? Is that what he was? He was the Khan at the time?
Yeah.
And then, of course, it pisses off the people that loved this guy, these ladies, to go up, and they're going to take on this tank with like fists and bottles and whatever rocks they pick up and whatever. They end up killing one with like mustard gas. But in the end, these women are the ones that end up taking this tank down. So it's a nice form of blowback, retribution, justice at the end that I appreciated. But, you know, it just answers the question, you know, how do you kill your enemies faster than you make them? I guess is what I'm trying to say.
So I guess here was actually my thought of like the movie coming out in 1988. And so watching it now, like, especially because the German or Russians have American accents and, you know, speaking English and everything, like it really feels like not exactly, it could be like a movie of the US Afghan war, but like you could imagine, and like, especially knowing as much as I do about it, a lot of these kind of things like happening and unfolding and all the analogies to the current Afghan war. But at the time, and I think this is added with like the feathers on the guns of the Mujahideen and stuff, that like the way you do it is like the Americans fought the Native Americans, just kill them all. And that's the way you win. If you really, you know, want to win, you got to kill them all. I'm not like advocating for that. I'm not suggesting that that's the solution. The solution is just not to fight and leave and let those people live their lives. But, I think that's what you're talking about. If you want to win counterinsurgency, I think you have to kill them all. And look at like, this isn't a completely absurd thing that I'm saying. I believe even Matt Spoot has written that, you know, the American Indian Wars lasted like a total of 240 years. If you consider like, you know, from the time that they first came into contact as British colonists to the, and Custer's last stand and all that, and the final battles and everything. Almost all of them were killed. They lost all the territory they had. And, Matthew said that, the war in Afghanistan may have to be as long as the American Indian War. And at that point, I think you're talking about the same thing. You just have to kill them all. And at the very least, kill the culture completely and anybody unwilling to give it up. So maybe, you still can have Afghans after this, but they're all going to be like the translator, right? They're going to have to be people who are indoctrinated well enough into that Soviet culture, but this American culture. If not, the other option is to leave and let these people live their lives.
So on one side of the coin, it's leave and don't get entangled, and the other side is genocide.
Yeah.
Which side are you on, Kyle?
I don't know. I do get, paid by antiwar.com. So I'm just gonna let
You're in the
y'all
pocket
guess.
of bigantiwar.com, huh?
That's
Okay.
right. Yeah, the big bucks come to the anti-war people. The Raytheon money, we can't turn it down fast enough. Everybody's saying that, man, I love making money off of bombs, but what I really want to do is donate money to end the wars.
Yeah, well, hey, that's a good segue. You guys at antiwar.com have a place where people can donate money. Is
Yeah.
there a link to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's one on the antiwar.com page. There's one at the Libertarian Institute page. I know both of them do the Amazon thing as well, where, if you do your Amazon shopping through those links, they get a kickback. Yeah, so either way, donate there. I also have a Patreon page if you want to donate to me directly. It's actually for our show now, for me and Will, so patreon.com/conflicts of interest. But yeah, support all those things is all real important.
Right. Yeah. Totally agree. And the Amazon thing I have set up for the Mises Institute. I'm a big fan of the work that they do there. And we have a Patreon as well, as we've mentioned a couple times on the show. lastnight.com/Patreon. Get pre-show and bonus content for after the show. And we are actually running low on time, and I feel like we have a lot more to talk about. But we're gonna have to, do it another time, I guess. But I did want to bring up the hubris of the tank commander. He was so attached. He's Captain Ahab for this tank. When he was given the option of rescue, and his men were given the option of rescue by the helicopter, they were out of fuel, leaking oil, lots of problems with the tank. I think one of the wheels was cracked that drives the treads. And the two remaining other guys, the guys he was commanding, were couldn't get on that helicopter fast enough to get out of there. And he was like, no, I'm not leaving this tank. Get back over here. And he threatens to shoot everyone in the helicopter, kill everyone to prevent them from taking that avenue of escape, because he wasn't willing to leave the tank. Now, we sort of talked about his PTSD and his kind of his drive to his identity is to be this tank guy, and he's not willing to give it up. Even when he realizes they're in a box canyon and they can't get out, he has to go back out the pass the way he came. And so he takes the fuel that, for whatever reason, they have fuel that could operate in the tank on a helicopter. I think they don't use the same type of fuel. Also, I was reading that a tank will run for under 5 minutes on a gallon of fuel. So how much fuel could they actually have carried in those jugs? 20, 30 gallons, maybe? So what do you got? A half an hour to an hour of fuel that, that's not getting you out of that canyon. I'm sorry. So that's a little bit unrealistic, but they had to make it kind of be this thing for the story. But the thing that really, this was almost poignant, was that those helicopter guys who'd offered them rescue were seeking water. And when we find them again, they had taken water from what the tank guys had poisoned, and they were all dead. And I just thought that went to the unintended consequences for their actions, for doing evil shit and not seeing what the effects downstream are going to be. So yeah, it was just an example of the horrific actions that are demonstrated in the film, and it ended up biting them all in the ass.
Yeah.
I thought. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna comment on the end of the movie, because I thought there was a point in the movie that was kind of weak. It was from the time that the tank ends up and realizes that they're cut off by the gorge on. I the helicopter shows up and then he turns it back. I mean, I guess maybe he was the highest ranking person there and everybody just fell in line. But I feel like somebody would have been able to overrule that call by him. I believe they had a helicopter on the radio. Do you think they could have been oh no, you have orders to return to base or something like that? But
right, and they had a gun on there too.
Right. So I don't know. I thought that part was kind of clunky. I thought them finding the people in the helicopter that they just happened to go the same little water hole. I thought that, and then the women somehow causing the landslide to destroy the tank. All that I thought was I felt like the movie up until that point had done a pretty good job of feeling very real and like very well paced, and then like they're like, oh shit, we have to like figure out how to wrap this up, and like did like a whole bunch of like crazy stuff at the end. I mean, it was like kind of action packed, like, you know, running with the RPG and all that stuff. And like in some ways you could see like how he was like training the Mujahideen on the run. And I thought all that was like interesting topics to explore and like, you know, get into a little bit and concepts to have in the movie. But yeah, the you know, from that point on, I thought was just like the weaker parts of the movie. But at least they did show like consequences for your own actions and how like doing, you know, reckless things and dangerous things in a country that's not yours could come right back and bite you in the face.
Yeah, I would say that it felt a little bit movie-y in those parts. Like it was definitely in the script that somebody was writing to have like these characters give them an arc and, you know, have all this stuff kind of coalesce and come back around at the end to have a nice tight ending to wrap up instead of, you know, just something that actually happened. But, you know, it's a drama. I thought it was pretty well done. It was interesting that a lot of the, like you had the con guy, the young con guy who was just like, you know, we need to kill this beast. But then you had like his cousin who was kind of like Mr. Bling Bling guy. And he just wanted to like get rich or something like that. He was kind of in it for the fight, but he just more wanted to plunder. And was it him that was super psyched when they found the helicopter, as if he was going to do anything with it? I mean, what are you going to do? Are you going to get some tools and break it all down? Or are you going to fly it out of there? I mean, what are you going to do with that?
Well, I mean, he got a bunch of ammo out of it. Like at the end, when he came running to the tank, he had like a crazy amount of ammo in his hand. So I guess they like found some like good stuff in there, and I'm sure realized that there was no way to fly it. I thought that was like the most unrealistic of the Afghan characters. I'm not sure if they made him like westernized to like, because they didn't have the CIA in the movie at all. Like they didn't have some white guy handing him a rifle at any point. So maybe that was the way like they try to tie in the American influence a little bit, but he like comes up wearing aviators and stuff like that. And I think that a lot of the Mujahideen guys were kind of on the devout side. And so that seemed like, I don't know, I felt like his character was a little unrealistic, but at the same time, like, you know, maybe they felt like they needed to draw like a lot of contrast between him and the other Afghans to like let people know like these are like two distinct groups of people who like kind of have different interests. Like it's not quite like they're both there on the same mission. Like the Mujahideen guys are there for like the bigger fight against the Soviets, and he's just there like to, you know, get revenge for the people in his village and stuff like that. But one thing I thought that comes off a little cartoonish, but I didn't think was actually too bad, was just like how the Afghans and the Taliban, or not the Taliban, the Mujahideen fight in the movie, where they're kind of like just shooting at random, like spraying from the hip. I think he shoots the RPG from the hip. And from my understanding, like from, again, the writing of Eric Margulies, who was embedded with them, then this is something that I also heard from, I don't know if this is actually his name, but he did a like 4-part series with Prof. CJ. He was an Iraq and I think Afghan war vet. And he kind of talks about how like there's a little bit more of like a God willing mentality. And so if you have an AK and your enemy has an AK, you stand 100 yards apart and kind of just shoot at each other from the hip. And if somebody gets shot in the face, then, you know, God willed you to die. And if everybody misses, then, you know, kind of. And there's a little bit of that too when the like Afghan guy in the very beginning scene tries to shoot the tank driver in the face, and then the gun like clicked, so it misfired or there wasn't any ammo in it. And he just kind of smiled. He was like, "Oh, you know, this is the will of how things are supposed to go." And so I think that's actually like a little bit of part of the culture and the way some of the fighting goes there. And so I didn't think. Like I'm sure there was like parts where like it was cartoonish, but there's other times where like I think it was like trying to show like the difference in fighting styles and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that helps explain, I think, one glaring scene in the film where you had all these Mujahideen fighters on a ridge, and they're shooting their AKs at the tank that is like hundreds of yards away. the chances of them hitting it, let alone doing any damage whatsoever, is 0. So I thought that was like hilarious. Like, are these you guys just have too many bullets and just wanted to hate carrying them around all the time? Because you might as well just be throwing them on the ground, because they are not going to do any damage against this tank at that range. You have no hope of hitting anything. But if, as you explain it, hey, maybe it's the will of God whether or not they're going to hit something and do damage or not.
Yeah. They mentioned that if Allah wills it several times, so I think that does play a big role in this, and also that if they die in battle or as a martyr, then they go to their version of heaven, right? And they fully believe that, so they're more than willing to die in this as a result of battle. So it's almost like in that Godfather 2 situation with the Cubans, where they're willing to die for their cause, and so that's why they were able to win. You kind of see that with the Afghans in this. Now with the RPG and the Versace sunglasses guy, I think that when he fires the RPG, it's accidental. Like doesn't practice good trigger control. Yeah.
The second time he fires it from the hip, though. The first time he like just shoots it off for no reason. The second time he takes a hip shot at the tank, and it gets it hits within 100 yards of the tank. And then after that, I think he breaks it. So
yeah, he broke the trigger mechanism, the firing mechanism, which is what Kovachenko is able to repair and build trust with them after he learns of and takes advantage of. And I don't mean advantage in the negative sense, but he utilizes the knowledge that's been shared with them to get that sanctuary with them. I forget the term that it was, but I thought that was really cool. And it also showed them struggle with, this is our code, but we want to kill this guy. We want this revenge, but do we really, are we going to live by our code, or are we going to just take exception sometimes? And I'm glad that they stuck to their code. Another thing that was interesting is when they offered him food and they all had to each offer him something, and then as soon as he made his selection, well, I'm sure he thought that was all for him, but as soon as he picked up one thing, they viewed it as, okay, he selected the thing he's going to take, and now we're all going to get our stuff back.
Yeah,
which I thought was kind of cute.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on Pashtun culture, so I don't know. Maybe that's like a thing of how things work. I mean, it seemed like in the film they tried to like not be like absurd. I don't think like any of the actual filming would have been done in Afghanistan. Just maybe the village. I don't know. I don't think so.
I think he was all in Israel.
Okay, but then there are a couple shots in the film where like they're actually shots of Afghanistan. They're like larger pan out shots, and they're like, I don't think even have the tank in them, but they do like actually take a couple shots of like Afghanistan. So I felt like they made an effort. So I'm sure it is somewhat accurate that something like that would happen. Yeah, I thought like the earning the trust thing happened like a little fast, but I guess you only have so much time in the movie, so you gotta make it happen. But yeah, like him using that part of the code, it was I guess interesting for the Afghans to decide whether or not that applies to like the occupier, right? Like this guy is in your country for the sole purpose of like killing and subjecting you to like their rule and their way of life, and you don't want to live by that, and so that's your enemy. And in that sense, to somebody, yeah, I'm sure it's different when even if like there's rivalry between different Pashtuns and they're killing each other, and then you offer them sanctuary or something like that. There's those cultural, like you're all part of the same culture, because like in the beginning of the film you saw that essentially the guy had surrendered. I mean, he didn't like put his hands up or anything, but like he was captured, right? And they ran him over, and so he didn't get that sanctuary, and do you then award it to people who won't give it to you? So that was interesting. And ultimately the women decide not to, right? They kill the tank commander. And I guess that's why the guy makes his decision to get back on the helicopter at the end.
Yeah, that was gonna be one of my questions. Like, why do you guys think he left? Because I felt like the new Khan was surprised, because he had thought that they had formed a bond and had formed a friendship almost, or at least an allyship. And so I think he was surprised that he did take that escape back to the Soviets.
Yeah, for sure. Well, what did you guys think about him as a character? Did you think he was redeemed at the end? It played like the movie plays out like a redemption arc. Were you on board with the main character there at the end, or did you still think, hey, no, he's still guilty? Maybe he's done a few nice things, a few good things, but ultimately he's guilty of this original murder.
Man, I have trouble with it because I think that the Afghan translator guy was right in that he did have a choice, but the choice was between, run this guy over or get shot himself. So, how much of a choice do you really have? It's a sort of a gun to your head kind of situation. And then when they're, attacking the village, yeah, it's military orders. They're told probably like there's, some threat here and you need to go and take it out. And it's under the guise, this veneer of tactical or some purpose to do it, and so then they do it. But this is one of the reasons why I would not be good in the military, because I have a hard time following orders that I just disagreed with.
Well, I always struggle with this question because it is so complex. I mean, we live in a society, and he came from a society where joining the military is a extremely honorable thing to do. You're going to defend your country, your homeland, and that's what you're taught to believe. It's not like that's something that you could like choose to believe. It's not like you're becoming a Nazi or something like that, and you're like finding this obscure reading to go along. I mean, I grew up in like Missouri, so like it was like indoctrinated like in school from early on. I mean, we are writing letters to soldiers in second grade and sending them, remember America boxes in third grade, all kinds of crazy stuff, right? And so in a way, like if everybody or almost everybody this guy is ever going to come into contact with tells him that the right thing to do is follow orders and do what you're told to do in the military, then he's gonna feel and seem crazy be outcast as a criminal for going against those orders. And so in a lot of ways it's very hard to be like, yeah, like he's guilty of the most cruel kind of murder, but he is. And and then as I cast judgment, I do always remember what Tom Woods says. They had that meme where everybody's doing the Nazi salute and they circle the one guy and they're like, oh yeah, I would be this person. And Tom Woods is, like, oh, well, maybe no, you wouldn't, because almost nobody is that person, right? Like it's really easy just to like be indoctrinated and go along with it. And so it's really easy to cast judgment sitting here on that person or anybody else in that situation. But I don't know. I guess I'm old enough now to have been in places in my life where you kind of realize that like you're doing things because that you're told to do and not because you've thought about it or it's the right thing to do. And then when you come up against that, it's really hard to make the right decisions. And I've never, have had to make those decisions upon like threat, in this guy's case of death, or in another case, of jail time or losing your career or something like that. That's, if you have kids, like it has to be hard as hell. Daniel, I know you have kids. It has to be like absolutely, I guess, terrifying to think about a situation like where you wouldn't be able to feed your kids. And I'm sure there are soldiers who feel like they're in that position where like, their wife stays home with the two kids all day because they're out serving, and you're just gonna like get court-martialed and leave your job and leave them to starve and suffer. Like it's tough.
It's tough. I'm not saying it's not tough, but it is basically the Nuremberg defense. Like, hey, I was told to do it. I'm just doing my job, and my job just involves, murdering people. So I'm not to be blamed, but
doing what I'm told.
I mean, you're right. It is very, very difficult. I'm sure there's all kinds of conflicting things going on his head. He's been propagandized his whole life. But ultimately, for me, you still have your humanity, and you still have to recognize that, you wouldn't want to be murdered. You wouldn't want your wife and your family to be murdered. Can you not put yourself in the shoes of somebody else and recognize their humanity as you are gunning them down. I understand you're propagandized and your enemy is dehumanized. I get all that. Absolutely. The governments of the United States and the Soviet Union and all these modern governments are fantastic at dehumanizing enemies and talking about how evil they are. But at some point you have to go, what is really my beef with this person? I see myself in him. Can I pull this trigger or not? And if I do, what does that make me? It makes me guilty of murder.
Yeah. I think that once he's had that, that moment where they've tied him to the rocks and to die, that was the point of crisis where from that point on, he broke that conditioning, started making decisions for himself that were both based on revenge, but also on redemption. So once he built trust with the Afghanis and he got the sanctuary with them and he repaired the RPG and he was like, tank kaboom. All right. Yeah. Tank kaboom. Let's do this. And then he started making decisions that were more on his own, but he was already on at that point. He should have been dead, right? So he got a new lease on life, and I think he started making decisions for himself that were more morally correct. More like he's going to help the guys that he just blew up their village the day before, but now he sees their perspective better, and he wants revenge against the people who had perpetrated it as well.
So I'm definitely my point here is in no way to like defend like the killing of civilians or anything like that. I'll just add that like I'm sure in reality like what would happen before this is like either his convoys come under attacks from the Mujahideen, or he's at least been at the Soviet camp. It says it's the second year of the war there, so it's been going on for a while, and so there are Soviet casualties from this war, right? And like I'm sure he talks to other soldiers who say, "Oh man, the Mujahideen did this crazy thing and killed this guy in this awful way, and these people are just animals." And look, what you could like see, like literally look and see, dead, soldiers are amputated, soldiers with amputated arms and stuff like that, and so. I'm sure they're able to make the threat feel very real and get all those responses going in the brain. You know what I mean? Like the brain's a chemical, I mean, it's in a lot of ways a computer and a chemical, organ. So, whenever like if you could just look at what's happening in the US right now, if you could get people's fear response up high enough, you get them to do a lot of stuff. And so on top of all the conditioning and the propaganda, you also really scare the hell out of them. And, people will do a lot of really crazy things to alleviate fear.
Right.
Absolutely.
Now we do need to start running this down. We've been going extra long already, but that you just reminded me of a point in the movie where one of the tanks gets attacked, or the village people are defending themselves, and they actually get one of the tanks and kill the guys inside, and then Kovanchenko is trying to save them, trying to get them out, and he's unsuccessful in doing so. But then they take the quote unquote perpetrator of that, the Russian guys do, and they are livid at him. They're like, "How dare you kill our guys? How dare you fight back against us? You are unworthy of fighting us." Meanwhile, they had just killed indiscriminately women, children, men, everything. And it was just this huge disparity in the amount of moral outrage that once you kill one of their guys, they get, indignant, but they just committed these massive atrocities, like 100 times, more frequency. So yeah, it was just,
and they're clearly the aggressor.
Yeah.
Clearly. I mean, you're rolling up in their house and then you get upset that they fight back.
How dare you, peasant?
Hypocrisy. Exactly.
Well, I mean, like, you've been sent from your country, right? You have to go to Afghanistan because these savages won't act correctly. You're there to improve their lives. At the end, I mean, like, you may have to kill some of them, but then the day you're there to stop these, 13th century savages from acting like, cavemen, and trying to bring them and educate them. Look, they brought the translator to Moscow. They gave him a good education. The guy was able to at least speak, Russian and Pashto. So like, he's a bright guy. He's like well dressed. He seems fairly happy most of the time. He like He has a career path. He's happy with what his kid's doing, right? Like, that's, you know what I mean? And so, like, you see that guy and you're like, hey, we're trying to bring this life to all of you. And all we're trying to do is make your life better. And I'm coming all the way across the world to come here to improve your life and make you better and fight this counterinsurgency. I mean, that's what's so disgusting about the counterinsurgency, and why I think you a lot of times had that frustration from the occupying forces, is because you can't understand why, because you've been told that they don't act right and you have to improve their lives and change their country for them to have a better life, and they resist you. You know, like, you're trying to help somebody and they're like they're literally trying to kill you for it. Like that, you know, to people who have really bought into it, is absolutely crazy for them. And, you know, I even see this with, I don't want to say somebody in the army, but definitely Americans I've talked to, like, have this problem when they think about the Pashtuns now, or people in Iraq or something like that, where they just can't understand why they would possibly want to kill any Americans, because we're just there to help them. We're rich. We're throwing money at their country. We're trying to, you know, make sure their women can wear mini skirts. I mean, who doesn't want that, right? And these people resist it anyways. And it must just be because they're crazy, barbaric savages who want their women to be in full burqas and to be poor and to just hump their goats all day or something like that. I mean, that's really, I think what a lot of it comes down to is just like the frustration with the occupation, because, you know, you're essentially there to, like, give them a better life.
So the propaganda is the mission. Is they're being told that they're being noble and heroic and doing a great thing and a great service, and they can't understand why somebody would resist that, when, if you look objectively at the reality of what they're doing, they're imposing this against you with weapons and destruction. So
right, yeah, you would think if you're trying to help somebody, you would have to kill them. Yeah.
So this will actually tie a nice bow on the end of it, because the resolution in the movie is he's talking to the tank commander, Komanchenko is, and he's like, basically, you know how you fought the Nazis before? Well, maybe now we are the Nazis. And it reminded me of, I forget the show, but it's a character from a British show called Peep Show, and there's like this gif of him saying, "You mean we're the baddies?" And he's like wearing a Nazi uniform. Anyway, I'll try to find out on the show notes page. It's like, what do you mean? We're the baddies? Like, we're the bad people?
What?
Yeah, because of course they're told totally different. But anyway, this is already gone on way too long. I appreciate you sticking around this long, Kyle, and I hope you can stick around a little bit longer for the post show. But we do have to do our final summary and review, and let's give it I don't know, out of tank shells. How many score out of 10 tank shells we give it? No, we'll go to Robert and then we'll go to Kyle for yours.
All right. So The Beast. As we've said, we've gone. It's a fairly, seemingly, somewhat accurate portrayal of the Russo-Afghanistani War of the 80s, and it's a nice like bottle thing. Like, we don't really get a whole lot of the external war. It's really just we follow this one crew around as they make one mistake. They turn right instead of turning left on the Kandahar Road, I think, and then the movie ensues. If they turned left and gone along on the road, they would have joined up with their buddies and gotten to where they wanted to go, and then our heroes would have had no chance to get their revenge. But as it is, they did, and somewhat satisfyingly so. I still don't think Kovachenko is any kind of a heroic character. He has somewhat redeemed himself, but he will always carry with him the horrors and the nightmares of the horrific acts that he did commit, and deservedly so. And hopefully that teaches him a lesson. So, this is all well directed, well acted. It's not perfect. I have my issues with the portrayal, the tactics, non-existent tactics. I still think people are smarter, but it does show that, this determined defenders that know the lay of the land better than the invaders do. and that gives them a distinct advantage when it comes to tactics. Even though you can't really call it tactics, but at least they can maneuver around the battlefield far better than the Russian tank can, because they don't have their map that is conveniently burned. But I give it to them, and their radio conveniently can't radio out. But whatever. You got to have the movie happen. So. This is it's good. It's a good psychological character study for the most part that I really enjoyed, which is what a lot of great war movies, Apocalypse Now and others, really analyze and specialize in, where you got these people under intense pressure. And to the movie's credit, you start off with every reason in the world to hate these tank guys, and as the movie goes on, you get, there's way more nuance. And even though everyone in that tank, I think, is guilty of indiscriminate murder, some are more okay with it than others. But, they're all damaged goods. They're all soldiers, all being propagandized. And it's more just a fascinating character study. So I give this 8 unexploded tank shells out of 10 that we're all running away from and just hiding behind bushes in case the tank explodes.
All right, very good. And Kyle, let's get your final summary and review and your score of tank shells.
Yeah, so I guess I'll also go with 8 tank shells out of 10 there. I thought on the micro level the movie is really good. So the opening scene, the interaction between the characters as they're stuck in the tank, and then the interactions between the different Afghans, the Mujahideen and the tribal fighters, and talking about the Afghan culture and trying to introduce that in the movie is all really good. But as Robert points out, some of the strategic stuff doesn't make sense. I thought the end of the movie was kind of clunky, and then I felt like there was just a couple of I wasn't sure if I liked the kind of band of female characters that seemed to just kind of be lost in the movie, and then have this interesting thing in the end where they're actually the most bloodthirsty of them. The lady at the end wipes her face like she's a vampire. I swear, that's exactly what I thought when she did. So there's a couple issues with it, but overall it's definitely a good movie. I'll definitely recommend it as an anti-war movie, a movie that even though it's about the Afghan-Russian war, it really could be about any war, especially any kind of counterinsurgency. And then again, Daniel just pointed out, but I really like that quote at the end. And I had here a big note to mention was, the difference between a defensive and an aggressive war and an occupation, and how that impacts people differently. You could imagine, this kid being the hero of Stalingrad, but is now the Nazi of Afghanistan, because the wars he's fighting are different, and that I'm sure weighs differently on the soul and everything like that. So good movie. I'll definitely recommend it, but a couple just little problems.
All right, very good. Thank you both for your takes on that. I agree. This is a very well done movie, and I actually thought that it was shot beautifully. The camera work and the vistas are really great. It does develop the characters quite a bit. I mean, they are doing horrific stuff at the beginning, like Robert mentioned, where how can you possibly think that these characters are going to be have any likability, but somehow they pull it off. You can sort of start to identify with them. So that's just a case of decent writing and good acting. I'm really surprised that this movie is so unknown and that it got such a low box office. I mean, 160 some odd $1,000 on a $20 or $30 million budget with not unknown actors. I've heard of Jason Patrick and Stephen Baldwin. He went on to do Biodome famously with Pauly Shore. He was also in The Usual Suspects, younger brother of Alec Baldwin. And oddly enough, if you read some of his quotes, he talks about movie reviewers as just wasting their time because you're not actually creating anything. You're just critiquing something else. I'll find that quote and I'll put it on the show notes page. But I thought it kind of it hits us a little bit funny because we're doing a movie review show. But anyway, I really enjoyed this. It was, again, one I had never heard of, and I'm very happy that our fan Nick recommended this, and we can raise the profile just a little bit. It is available for viewing on Amazon Prime if you have Amazon Prime Video. It's currently free and available, so do check it out. We'll have a link to it on our show notes page as well. And I want to thank I got to give it Tank Shells. I'm going to give 8.5 frags on this for a score, so just slightly higher than you guys, just because I want to be a little bit different. But a really good movie, and I do recommend checking it out. I want to thank Kyle for being our guest, and we'll also have the previous appearance that you were on for War Machine on our show notes page as well. I recommend people check you out at Libertarian Institute and also at antiwar.com. And then, Robert, next week, we're going to be doing another show, but we're not going to be recording for quite a while. We're going to have like almost a week and a half off, but we're going to be doing They Live with the great Robert P. Murphy, the author of Choice and one of the scholars associated with Mises Institute itself. He was doing the Contra Krugman podcast with Tom Woods until recently, and he does his own show called The Bob Murphy Show, on which he did a review of They Live about a year ago. So that will be part of the basis of discussion for next week with him. I will be pushing back on some of his analysis of the film, and we will have a very great discussion, I think.
Great. I'm looking forward to learning more about this Bob Murphy fellow.
Right. Yes. Have you read the book that I got you a couple of years ago, signed by one Bob Murphy?
No, but I should. I should. But it's back in Stanwood, so I might be able to pick that up when I head over to the west side.
Okay. Very good. Well, so that'll be what we have next week. And Kyle, any final shout outs you want to give for people to check out your stuff?
Yeah, just check out the show, Conflicts of Interest. It's on all the podcasters. It comes out as a podcast, but I really recommend checking out the YouTube video. We put a lot of work into it, and it looks really great. So check that out. If you like it, share it.
All right, very good. And I vouch for that as well. I remember when you first launched that, and I started watching them, and you guys do a great job. You and Will are really good with each other. You guys have a nice repartee, and you get a lot of information out in a very short period of time. So it's really good stuff. And thanks again for coming on. I hope we can have you back sooner than we did have you last time. It's
definitely
been over 2 years. I think we need to get a little more frequent than that. But Robert, what can people do to support what we do here, other than going to our lastnighters.com/Patreon to give us some dollars to get access to the pre-show and post-show content, which we'll do a little post-show content after this. But you got a few more things up your sleeve, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, just Trupster.com. That's all. Just do that. Check it out. There's just a few designs. I need to get more up there. I really do. I've had some designs in my mind, and I know Daniel's got some kind of weird idea about Christmas ornaments. So maybe we'll play around with that. But check it out. Talk to people. Tell us stuff. Tell them stuff.
Yeah, like, subscribe, send us reviews. I think we solicited people roasting us in reviews. I mean, give us the 5 stars, but then say something funny. We'll read it on air. And hopefully that'll solicit even more. That'll be great. But anyway, thanks again for being our audience. And we will check out next week with They Live. I'll be wearing sunglasses, no doubt. So thanks again, Kyle. And I hope you can stick around for some of the post-show content right after this.